Hey, you! No! Don't shoot! I can help you!
Who are you? What is this place?
My name is Paul, and this is the dollhouse.
Playing Alisa is like entering the mind of a circus manager trying to write a dark fairy tale. Another one in the ever-growing list of PS1 inspired retro horror game, Alisa is described as a horror-themed action-adventure game, which is what your expectations should be. Don't go into this game with the expectation of old-school RE-style difficulty. Expect more of an amusement park-style haunted mansion than Spencer Mansion. This game has an immaculate vibe, even though the game starts with what I can only call peak bedroom quality voice acting suitable for YouTube parody.
Alright, listen up. Tonight, a spy stole important blueprints. And he got away.
After a bit in the world, I felt like I had been transported to an alternate reality. Every part of Alisa seems to be working perfectly together to bring this feeling. The intro section itself sets up the mood for the game perfectly. The weird camera angles and the stilted voice acting, adding a weird blend of uneasiness and charm to the whole thing. It's not really something that can be described as just atmospheric or terrifying. It balances its own tension with some humor that often just comes out of nowhere. I would say that's the defining feature of Alisa's atmosphere.
Chan, what are you doing?
I swallowed my cure-dent.
Are you okay?
From the visual, sound design to the enemies, it all just joins together to take the player on this whimsical ride, always keeping me excited to see what the game has to show next. The pre-rendered backgrounds are wonderfully well crafted and detailed, and with the whole thing being low resolution, it feels like playing a game made in the era it's inspired by. It's easy for me to become happy by just seeing the crunchy pixels. Yeah, I just love the clear amount of work that got into it all. These backgrounds don't go just for a rusted, decaying look that is common in these games. I mean, there definitely are parts that look like they are in need of maintenance, but a lot of the areas look inhabited instead of abandoned. Sometimes the camera would move into these backgrounds as if taking the point of view of something that is lurking or stalking Alisa as she moves around. Or sometimes the camera will lead me to understand my complete inability to gauge depth. The soundtrack itself can range suspense and intrigue builders, keeping you company as you explore, or music you would expect clowns to listen to while sharpening their knives. There's even tracks that are soothing on the surface but feels like there's something evil underlying it. Every part of the so-called dollhouse has some unique track, and each room looks completely distinct from one another. This meant the whole map was well mapped into my brain. In fact, I completely forgot there was a map for the vast majority of the game because I just never felt the need to check it. Though I think the second half of the game is a dip visual-wise, a step away from the Alisa in Clownland. These areas are definitely not half-assed, just something I don't find as interesting, and some things that don't work, like the garden where all the trees have become metal, and there's this tree which is described to be filled with sharp leaves. Now, pixels might be sharp, but a hyper-pixelated mess doesn't really look like anything. Much of this area didn't really leave a strong impression in my head. It looked just a bit too normal for my liking, and it being that late in the game didn't help with my expectations. I feel similarly about the enemies in this area as well. In general, I love the enemy designs of this game. The dolls look great, and the ones that crawl unnaturally on the ground just creep me out. On the other hand, you can have literal clown shoes bonking you to death. From the transparent glass fish of the flooded basement to the ballet dancers on the first floor, I was just straight up excited to come across a new enemy. Though for being the dollhouse, I think Casper could have gone harder on the creepy doll aesthetics. I used to be really scared of dolls at one point due to recurring nightmares where I would be in a room full of dolls and their eyes would just follow me. Even now I get creeped out being in a room with a doll. But the dolls in here didn't really scare me. It's the lack of shiny unblinking eyes following you is the reason. There's another reason I felt more excited to see new enemies than scared. Because, well, for a horror game, none of them are particularly threatening. I enjoyed much more looking at them and hearing how they sound than I did fighting them. I will just say straight up, I do not like much of the gameplay here. The appeal of combat in games like this is the tension that is created when you are fighting the controls as much as fighting the enemies. It ideally should require real dexterity to manage everything. For a while, I struggled with the game because of the way the combat works. Managing height and aim while being unable to move took some getting used to. I know it's similar to old school RE games and remake which I have played, but it wasn't really a fun process till the end, and it felt completely unintuitive due to the lack of auto-aim in early game. Which still wouldn't be a problem if the game didn't incentivize combat with its customization system. Enemies.tooth wheels, the in-game currency with which you can buy guns and costumes, which to be fair is a system I really like, but having to engage with this combat system over and over was like pulling teeth. When the game gives you a clear reward for engaging enemies directly all the time, it means at some point the enemies stop being scary, even when they pose a threat, because I will just fight and kill them next time. Which, after I realized that, I also realized that the combat in this game is actually really piss easy. It's when I stopped using the gun for most enemies and used the saber I unlocked early in the game instead, and had to care much less about aiming with the finicky system. The enemies attack very slowly. Most of the areas have enough room that you can just move in any direction to avoid attacks, and so that you can get really early on in the game is so powerful in just running around enemies and slashing them to death. Enemies really cannot corner you. I was having such an easy time I changed to tank controls to see if the modern scheme was fucking with the intended experience to make it that way. No. It was a bit harder to dodge, but here's me bullying a late game enemy with little to no effort. There were fights that were annoying as well. Like at one point the game gives you an auto-aim attachment which doesn't really work like it says on there. It points to where the enemy was last present instead, which led to extremely frustrating situations like this. Any enemies gnawing at your feet or above your head is just kinda shit to fight. Also, the enemy AI is straight trash. They would get stuck on anything, and in general, I'm not someone who wants to cheese fights, but hey, if they are gonna go through the trouble of getting themselves stuck on furniture, don't mind me not shaking them free. Another part that makes some enemies weird to fight is that they are placed in zones where the cameras change, which in fairness happened rarely. Though the maze was one head-hurting moment. The puzzles in this game were generally a nice change of pace from the combat. They weren't very hard but required me to be attentive, which I liked. Though this one puzzle with a timer from walls closing in on me made me mad because I had to go through this section 3 times in a row. Sure, skill issue on my part here, probably, but still, repeating sections like these are never fun. I just got bored of the combat and killed everything to make backtracking easy and to unlock dresses and weapons, which are actually really great. From the starting weak pistol to the full auto to a powerful magnum revolver, all the weapons are different and unlocking one after the another provides some great damage upgrade, which I love. I just wish the game had enemies hard enough that made me use the later weapons more. I won't say I hated every encounter in the game, cause I liked a few enemy placements. The dresses though, I love them. Even if they weren't completely defined functionally, which they were, I would keep unlocking them just to try them out. Some really cool designs there. I love this whole system. I also love how killing bosses gives you options to any of their shit, which I also love. Maybe that's what the developer meant by Soul's One influence, because I can't really think of anything else that would make this statement make sense. I actually really like the bosses in this game, which I can't really speak about without going into the story, so spoilers from here. Alice's story starts with you being a royal agent tasked with capturing a spy who has stolen some blueprints. She and her fellow agent end up in an abandoned village in the forest outside of which Alisa notices the spy who stole the blueprint and chases him. Separated from her partner, Alisa ends up getting captured by weird mechanical abominations and ends up in the dollhouse. Alisa's story is weird. It creates a cool atmosphere and has some really fun cutscenes, which just got me interested in seeing the story just so I could see more of them. But when it comes to actual substance, there's not much to talk about there. The highlight in terms of the story is definitely the presentation of it all. I like how the bosses are built up in their respective regions. I like how the story content is presented in general. The bosses from Edmonton in the House of Fun coming at you with his Tom and Jerry device to kill you, or the spy who you fight in a rail shooter segment. Fucking amazing. This is kind of the type of batshit change of pace that makes me love the game. I could completely forgive the awful insta-death stealth section that came before because of how much I enjoyed this. But what I didn't enjoy was the ending. The Dollmaster running things behind the scene was great and all, but the game pointing out there might be something sinister about the blueprints we have been told to get back and never actually showing what's wrong with them really got on my nerves. I know there are other endings, but they are equally as vague and not particularly substantive. Same for the bits and pieces of lore we get about the dollhouse itself, with which I try to piece together the story, which just doesn't come out to be that interesting. When a bunch of things like mining, god artifact, Edmonton's experiments all are mentioned, I can see how his experiments created the dolls, but it's just all a bit scattered. So my thoughts in short are this. I can see what Casper was trying to do with the narrative, with two layers to the story. But while I do appreciate it, it leaves me a bit unsatisfied. The whole thing is at points too ambiguous and scatterbrained for my liking, which actually just matches my thoughts on this game overall. I am a bit unsatisfied with it. I think this game, as cheap as it is worth the shot for the atmosphere and presentation alone, but it didn't maintain that high all throughout, which if it did, I wouldn't even mind the gameplay. Which, well, when I wasn't getting hyped looking around, the gameplay really grated on me. But I do look forward to whatever Casper Crows comes up with next.